Halloween used to be my favorite holiday. It was the one time of year you could be anything you wanted to be. You could draw out your darkest desires and display them for the world to see. No one would think you were odd for being the person you always wanted to be. There was no judgment for your choice of attire, and oftentimes you were commended for that choice. Then at the end of the night, you received a reward for your efforts in the form of a bag full of candy. I'm far too old to go door to door, begging for treats, but I enjoy watching my children do the same. Weeks in advance, we let them pick out their costumes. They are far too young to delve into the ghastly, and usually end up picking a character of a popular movie or TV show. I simply take my pictures and urge them on to each doorway. I always remind them to say trick or treat before the door opens. It's been a few years now, but I'm starting to question the tradition, especially after visiting 113 Forest Road. This past year, we made the rounds of our local neighborhood. We made sure to only approach homes that had their porch light on, which was the unspoken rule. Our night had almost come to an end when we reached a home that had been vacant for the last 2 seasons. It was the largest within our neighborhood, towering at 2 stories when all others had only 1 level. It was a large brick Victorian monstrosity that may have once been beautiful, but the landscape had long needed work. It was the house most kids made stories about, and when we saw the dim glow of that yellow bulb, I was unsure of letting my children approach. My oldest begged to ring the doorbell, and my youngest simply wanted more candy. I was outnumbered, and relented at their pleas. My wife sat within the idling vehicle while I followed close behind. The 2 made their way up the steps, and I waited at the bathroom. Like always, I reminded them of what to say. My oldest son held his brother's hand and pressed the lighted button. Ringing, much like church bells, echoed from within the house for a moment, before returning to silence. After a few seconds, they turned to me with questioning looks. I had noticed a moving truck parked outside the home earlier in the month and knew someone must have lived there, but I had not seen them. There was no car in the driveway, and I did not see any lights on inside. I started to think they were simply gone and left a light on in case it was dark by the time they returned. I waved to my children to come back to the car and told them we would just head home. The look of disappointment on their faces told me they were not ready to end the night just yet. Their faces lit up as the door creaked to life, and a voice beckoned them to wait. "Trick or treat!" They both screamed with excitement. A feeling rolled in me like thunder, and a signal of danger rang in my head. Something wasn't right. If they were home all this time, where was the car I had seen sitting in the driveway the last few weeks? I instinctively advanced on my 2 children, taking the steps in leaps. A feeling inside me told me they should not go towards that voice, and I called for them to stop as they turned towards the door.
"I choose both."
The voice seemed strained, like that of a lifetime smoker. 2 ragged hands shot from the parted pathway and drew both of my little boys inside. Their screams echoed in my head. My adrenaline shot me forward, but my body slammed against a closing door. I pounded repeatedly, screaming obscenities of every nature. My body shook violently as my world became a spiral of despair. The whole scene drew the attention of my wife, and soon she was right behind me. In an effort to find the entry, I took a step back, lifted my right foot, and dropped it full force into the hardwood. The door frame shattered, allowing the barrier to fly freely into the darkness. I cried out in terror for my little boys as I rushed through each room. My entire reason for living had been snatched up in an instant, and I had been too late to stop it. When the house had been searched completely with no results, my wife phoned the authorities through wails of agony. We both held each other until sirens lit up our tiny neighborhood. It has been a year now. We still have no answer as to what happened to our children. My wife distanced herself from me, and I'm sure she blames me for what happened. I don't fault her for that. I blame myself as well. If I had not let them go to that door or listened to my feelings sooner, they'd both still be here. Halloween is no longer a time of fun for us, but a reminder of our mistakes. I don't even leave my house on that night, and even the sight of a pumpkin makes tears stream down my face. The drive home from work is especially hard, witnessing the houses that decorate for the occasion. I'm almost in a panic before I close myself within the safety of my home. Please, if you read this, don't let your kids visit 113 Forest Road on Halloween.
Wilfred Kafka sat at the table in his kitchen. It was 8 in the morning. In front of him sat a plate with 1 bagel, 1 egg, and 3 orange slices. To the right of his plate was a half-empty cup of coffee. Wilfred stared at his food, which was going cold, and he did not feel like eating breakfast. He had woken up with the intention of starting his day with a healthy meal, yet there was a sudden sensation that overcame his hunger. He stood up and took the plate and coffee to the kitchen sink. Wilfred bent over and opened the cupboard door below the sink to reveal a trash can. He dumped all of his hard work into the trash. He straightened up and poured the coffee down the drain. Today was going to be just like any other day. Wilfred had a job at the Nama Towers. He was a mere accountant, nothing more, nothing less. He did not live any form of exciting life, nor did he necessarily desire one. He preferred to keep to himself and read in his spare time. It was time for work. Wilfred walked down the hall and into his bedroom. He turned to his right from the door and walked over to his dresser. He thought that wearing an orange tie with his light blue shirt would do for work today. Wilfred reached for the dresser and then stopped. Something felt off for him. The air behind him grew cold, and he could feel a faint breeze across the back of his head, near his ears. It was almost a whisper. That is when the door exploded. It was not as if the door had combusted and turned to ash. Wilfred's front door burst inward. The frame flung shards of wood into his foyer, and the door split in two. Following the door was a man. Wilfred, being the simple man that he was, sought to investigate the noise and find the source of what sounded like a serious accident. He walked out of his room and down the hall into the foyer. Lying on the floor next to the remaining pieces of the door was a man struggling to get up, despite his possibly broken arm. "Are you all right? Please, help me get up," the man responded. Wilfred bent over and grabbed the man by his shoulder. He carried him into the kitchen and sat him down at the table. Wilfred stepped back and got a look at the man. He had a shaggy beard which was caked with dry mud. The man's face was thin from starvation. Blood ran down the man's face from an open wound on his forehead, right above his right brow. "Can I get you anything?" "No, there's no time." Wilfred did not understand. Of course there was time. There was always time. He was going to have to call into work about this. He was not quite sure how to describe the situation to his employer, Mr. Harris. He would have to say an emergency of sorts had happened in his home, which was very unusual. It was unusual for anyone to have an emergency in his or her home. "Are you hearing me?" the man asked. "There is no time at all. You have to listen." "All right, sir. Tell me, what could be so important?" The man took out a gun. He set it on the table. It appeared just as rough as its owner. It was caked with mud and scratched. Wilfred took a step back. While the gun seemed too damaged to be able to actually fire a bullet and successfully cause harm, he wanted to take precaution. "Can you please put that away? I need this, and you're going to need it too." "And why would that be?" "They're coming. They know that I know." "What on Cornac are you possibly talking about?" The man shuffled in his seat. The pain caused by his broken arm was apparent. He winced and twitched with every breath. He stared straight at Wilfred, and he did not blink. "We are not from Cornac. We are not Cornacians. Everything you have ever learned in primary school is wrong. Everything you learned in junior high school is wrong. Everything you learned in conditionary school is wrong. Sir, you are beginning to sound as if you've lost your mind. I haven't. You have to think. I think all the time. The idea was preposterous. Wilfred always thought. It is impossible to be a sentient human being and not have thought. I think just the way that you do. No, you don't. Have you ever thought why things just tend to happen? They're controlling it. And who do you mean by they? The controllers. They don't allow us to think. We do things and sometimes they don't make sense, but that's okay in our minds because that's just the way things are. They really aren't. We aren't meant to have these lives. We are not even meant to live on Kornak. We're meant to live on Earth. The man was having trouble getting through to Wilfred, and the frustration was apparent in his face. It wouldn't be much longer, and he only had a brief moment to try and jumpstart the revolution. Wilfred laughed. What on Kornak is Earth? The man heavily sighed and winced from his broken arm. Wilfred took a step towards him to help his pain, but stopped, and then stepped back. He then stared blankly at the man. Earth is our home planet, not Kornak. We are not from here. But Kornak is the only planet in the entirety of existence. How else can you explain stars? Stars are other galaxies and planets. There are hundreds of thousands of planets out there. They told us in primary school that stars are the remnants of destroyed planets. And if we're not from Kornak, then how did we get here? They took us from Earth. They took us and gave us lives. They gave us thought and a way to live. They gave us the idea that we had free will. We never had any to begin with. Well, if there is no free will, then how am I willingly talking to you? I can't explain that. I don't know. Maybe you're starting to think on your own. It begins to override the thought process implanted in our heads. Come on, you've got to think! The man started shouting. Time was running out. I do not know what to do other than think the way I always have. The man tensed up and then relaxed. He stomped his foot on the ground. But how have you always thought? How has your brain always worked? What is your first memory? Do you remember primary school? How about conditionary school? Well, now that you mention it, I can't say that I do. You see? Think! I don't remember anything other than now, and everything that I'm supposed to. At that moment, things became a blank. The man sitting at Wilfred's table let out a single tear. Somewhere, Wilfred heard a faint whispering. Wilfred heard this sharp whispering with its malicious commands and spiteful words, and heard it tell the man to grab his gun. Wilfred heard the whisper grow into a scream. He heard the scream grow so loud. The room was pulsating. Spots were blinding Wilfred's vision. The man put the barrel of the gun up against his temple and pulled the trigger. Somewhere, a voice told Wilfred to forget. Wilfred stared at the corpse of the man sitting before him at the table. It was a peculiar sight. Now why on Kornak would he do that? Wilfred walked back to his room and put on his blue shirt and orange tie. He left his room and left the house through the hole where the front door used to be. It was time to go to work, and to be a productive member of society.